The morning mist hung heavy over Windsor Castle as Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood at her bedroom window, watching the first rays of sunlight pierce through the gray clouds. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the morning tea that had grown cold in her grasp. The news had come just hours before dawn, delivered by a somber-faced private secretary whose usual composure had cracked under the weight of his message. King Charles III was gone. The man who had waited decades to wear the crown, who had modernized the monarchy with gentle determination, had passed peacefully in his sleep at Clarence House. The nation would wake to a world forever changed. But for Catherine, the transformation felt deeply personal and overwhelmingly immediate. She thought back to their last conversation just 3 days prior, when Charles had called her privately to discuss the upcoming state visit from the Japanese emperor. His voice had been tired but warm, filled with the grandfatherly affection he had always shown her children.
He had mentioned how proud he was of the way she and William had handled their royal duties.
How she had brought a natural grace to the role that reminded him of his beloved mother. The irony wasn't lost on her that in a few short hours, she would no longer be the Princess of Wales. William would become King William the Fire, and she would step into the role she had been quietly preparing for since their engagement was announced over a decade ago. Queen Catherine. The title felt foreign on her tongue, heavy with centuries of history and expectation. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Ma'am?" came the gentle voice of her lady-in-waiting. "The prince requires your presence in the study when you're ready." Catherine nodded, setting down her untouched tea. She glanced once more at her reflection in the window, seeing not just herself but the ghost of every queen who had come before. Today would mark the beginning of something entirely new, not just for the monarchy, but for the woman who had once been Kate Middleton from Berkshire. As she made her way through the familiar corridors that would soon feel different under her new title, Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that this moment had been building for years. Every royal engagement, every speech, every carefully chosen outfit had been preparation for this day when she would no longer be learning to be royal, but would instead help define what royal meant for a new generation. The weight of the Kohinoor diamond, which she knew would soon rest upon her head, seemed to press down on her shoulders even though she wasn't yet wearing it. This legendary gem, with its complex history and symbolic power, would become more than just a jewel in her crown. It would represent the bridge between the monarchy's past and its future. Between tradition and the modern world, she and William were determined to serve. The castle felt different already, as if the very walls understood that an era had ended and another was about to begin. Staff moved with hushed urgency, their usual cheerful greetings replaced by respectful nods and sympathetic glances. The machinery of royal transition was already in motion, unstoppable and precise, carrying her forward into a destiny she had accepted years ago, but was only now truly beginning to understand. The study door opened to reveal William standing beside the massive oak desk, his face pale but resolute. Papers were scattered across the surface, official documents that would formally begin his reign. He looked up as Catherine entered, and for a moment she saw not the future king but the young man she had fallen in love with at university, vulnerable and uncertain. "How are the children?" Catherine asked softly, moving to his side. George, Charlotte, and Louis had been told the news gently, but she knew the full impact wouldn't hit them until they saw their grandfather lying in state. "George understands more than the others," William replied, his voice hoarse from the morning's difficult conversations. He asked if this meant he would be the Prince of Wales now. The weight of legacy passed down through generations hung between them. Their eldest son, barely into his teens, was now second in line to the throne. Catherine reached for William's hand, feeling the familiar warmth that had anchored her through every challenge of their royal life. "We'll help him through it just as your father helped you and your grandmother helped him." The private secretary cleared his throat respectfully. "Your Majesties, if I may." The title hit Catherine like a physical blow. She was no longer Your Royal Highness, but Your Majesty. The woman who had once worked as an accessories buyer for a fashion company was now the Queen of England. "The Archbishop of Canterbury will arrive within the hour to discuss the arrangements," the secretary continued. "The Prime Minister has requested an audience at your earliest convenience, and the cabinet will need to be sworn in again under the new reign." William nodded, slipping seamlessly into the role he had been born to assume, but Catherine noticed the slight tremor in his jaw. the way his free hand clenched and unclenched. She squeezed his hand tighter, a silent reminder that they would face this together as they had faced everything else. What about the coronation? Catherine found herself asking. The question surprised her with its practicality. Already, her mind was shifting into the strategic thinking that would be required of her new position. Traditionally, it would be held within a year, came the reply. But given the circumstances and the modern approach His late Majesty favored, it could be sooner if their Majesties prefer. Catherine thought of the Kohinoor diamond, currently secured in the Tower of London with the other crown jewels. Soon she would wear the crown that had adorned the heads of queens for centuries. The diamond's controversial history weighed on her mind. She had already been quietly researching its origins, understanding that her coronation would inevitably renew discussions about its rightful ownership. The morning sun had risen higher, casting long shadows across the study. Through the windows, Catherine could see the flags being lowered to half-mast, the visible sign to the world that everything had changed. Soon those same flags would rise again for a new monarch, and she would stand beside William as he was proclaimed king. Her phone buzzed with a message from her mother.
Carol simply saying, "We're here for you."
Darling. The normalcy of that maternal concern delivered through such an everyday medium provided a momentary anchor to the woman she had been before this morning, transformed her into something else entirely. As officials began filtering into the room with documents requiring immediate attention, Catherine realized that her life as she had known it was already over. The careful balance she had maintained between her public role and private self would now tip permanently toward duty. But looking at William, seeing the determination replacing his initial shock, she felt ready for what lay ahead. The great hall of Buckingham Palace had been transformed overnight into a throne room, befitting the proclamation of a new monarch. Catherine stood beside William as he was formally declared King William V, her composure masking the surreal nature of watching her husband accept the crown that had been destined for him since birth. The ceremony was witnessed by the Privy Council, senior members of Parliament, and representatives from the Commonwealth realms. Catherine noticed how each face turned toward them held a mixture of grief for Charles and hope for the new reign. The weight of their expectations settled around her like an invisible cloak. "I solemnly promise and swear to govern the people of this United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland," William declared, his voice carrying clearly through the ornate chamber. Catherine found herself mouthing the words along with him, understanding that these weren't just his vows but theirs together. When the ceremony concluded and the formal photographs were taken, Catherine finally had a moment to process what had occurred. She was now Queen Catherine, a title that would define the rest of her life. Every decision, every public appearance, every word would be scrutinized through the lens of her position. Lady Sarah, the Queen's private secretary who had served the royal family for over 2 decades, approached with a schedule that would have intimidated Catherine just hours earlier. "Your Majesty, the funeral arrangements require your input on several matters. There's also the question of your first official portrait as Queen, and the designer for your coronation gown will need to meet with you this week." The coronation gown. Catherine's mind immediately went to the crown she would wear, specifically the controversial Kohinoor diamond. She had been studying its history for months, knowing this day would eventually come. The 105-carat diamond had been taken from India during the colonial period and had become a symbol of both royal power and historical injustice. "Lady Sarah," Catherine said carefully, "I'd like to schedule a private meeting with historians and cultural experts about the crown jewels, particularly regarding the Kohinoor." The older woman's eyebrows rose slightly. "Of course, Your Majesty. Might I ask the nature of your inquiry?" Catherine glanced around the room, ensuring their conversation remained private. "I want to understand all aspects of its history before my coronation. The new reign should address the complexities of our past, not simply inherit them without question." That afternoon, as she sat in what was now her private study, Catherine researched everything she could about the diamond's journey from India to the British crown. The stone had originally been much larger, weighing over 190 carats when it left India. Its current form was the result of Queen Victoria having it recut to enhance its brilliance. But in doing so, much of its original character had been lost. The parallels weren't lost on her. Like the diamond, she too was being shaped by forces beyond her control, cut and polished to fit the requirements of her new role. But unlike the Kohinoor, she had chosen this transformation. Every decision from this point forward would reflect not just her personal values, but the values she wanted the monarchy to represent. Her secretary announced the arrival of Dr. Priya Sharma, a historian specializing in colonial artifacts, and Dr. James McPherson, an expert on the crown jewels. As they entered, Catherine felt a familiar sensation she had experienced throughout her royal life. The moment when careful preparation met real-world responsibility. "Your Majesty," Dr. Sharma began after the formal greetings. "I understand you're interested in the comprehensive history of the Kohinoor diamond." "I am," Catherine replied. "And more than that, I'm interested in what wearing it will represent in the 21st century. My coronation will be watched by billions of people worldwide, many from countries with complex relationships to British colonial history. The conversation that followed would prove to be one of the most important of her early reign, setting in motion decisions that would define not just her coronation, but the entire approach of the new monarchy to historical accountability and modern relevance. Dr. Sharma leaned forward, her expression serious. "Your Majesty, the Kohinoor's history is deeply intertwined with the pain of colonialism. It was taken from the 10-year-old Maharaja Duleep Singh after the British annexation of Punjab in 1849. The boy was forced to present it to Queen Victoria as part of the Treaty of Lahore." Catherine felt her heart sink as the full weight of the diamond's legacy became clear. So a child was made to give up his family's treasure as a condition of surrender. "Yes," Dr. McPherson added, his voice gentle but factual. "And since then it has been requested back by India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan at various times. Each nation has historical claims to the stone." As the experts continued their explanation, Catherine found herself thinking about her own children. The idea of George being forced to surrender something precious as a symbol of defeat was heartbreaking. How could she wear something that represented such trauma, even centuries later? "What are my options?" she asked finally. "I want my coronation to represent hope and unity, not the painful legacy of imperialism." The room fell silent. Dr. Sharma exchanged glances with Dr. McPherson before speaking carefully. "Your Majesty, you could choose not to wear the traditional crown containing the Kohinoor. Queen Elizabeth II's crown could be modified, or an entirely new crown could be commissioned. Or," Dr. McPherson added hesitantly, "there have been discussions over the years about returning the diamond to its country of origin, though that raises complex questions about which country has the strongest claim." Catherine stood and walked to the window, looking out at the London skyline. The city sprawled before her, home to people from every corner of the former empire. Her reign would serve them all, including those whose ancestors had been affected by the very colonial policies that brought the Kohinoor to Britain. "I need to discuss this with the king," she said finally, "but I want to explore all possibilities. Perhaps this moment of transition is the right time to address these historical complexities." That evening, over a quiet dinner with just William and their children, Catherine raised the subject. George, now bearing the title Prince of Wales, listened intently as his parents discussed the weight of history and the responsibility of leadership. "So the diamond was stolen?" Charlotte asked with the direct clarity that only children possess. "It's more complicated than that," William replied carefully. "It was taken during a time when powerful countries often took valuable things from less powerful ones. People didn't always think that was wrong back then. But we know it's wrong now," George said thoughtfully. "So what do we do about it?" Catherine felt a surge of pride at her eldest son's moral clarity. "That's exactly the question we're trying to answer." Later, after the children had gone to bed, Catherine and William sat in their private sitting room, the weight of the decision settling between them. The coronation was still months away, but the choices they made now would echo through history. "My grandmother wore that crown for 70 years, William said quietly. "It feels strange to consider changing such a fundamental tradition." "But your grandmother also evolved with the times," Catherine reminded him. "She modernized the monarchy in countless ways. Maybe this is our modernization." As they talked through the night, Catherine realized that her Kohinoor moment wasn't just about a diamond or even a crown. It was about defining what kind of queen she wanted to be and what kind of monarchy they wanted to leave for their children. The decision would require courage, wisdom, and a willingness to prioritize moral leadership over mere tradition. The future of the Kohinoor had become a symbol of the future of the monarchy itself, and Catherine was beginning to understand that her choice would signal not just the dawn of a new reign, but the birth of a fundamentally different kind of royal leadership. The weeks following their private discussion brought a whirlwind of secret meetings and careful consultations. Catherine found herself in unprecedented territory, navigating between constitutional lawyers, Commonwealth representatives, and cultural historians. Each conversation added another layer to the complexity of her decision. Prime Minister Harrison arrived at Windsor Castle for what was officially described as a routine briefing about Commonwealth relations. However, Catherine knew the real purpose was to discuss the implications of potentially returning the Kohinoor diamond. The Prime Minister, a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and pragmatic eyes, listened carefully as Catherine outlined her concerns. "Your Majesty," the Prime Minister said slowly, "while I admire the moral impulse behind this consideration, we must think about the precedent it might set. If we return the Kohinoor, there will inevitably be calls for the return of other artifacts in British museums and collections." Catherine had anticipated this argument. But doesn't that assume all those artifacts should remain here? Perhaps some precedents need to be set. The constitutional implications were staggering. The crown jewels weren't just personal property. They were symbols of national sovereignty. Yet Catherine couldn't shake the feeling that true sovereignty in the modern world required moral courage, not just legal authority. Her next meeting was with representatives from India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, the three nations with the strongest historical claims to the diamond. Ambassador Raj Patel from India spoke with quiet dignity about his country's perspective. "Your Majesty, the return of the Kohinoor would be seen as acknowledgement of historical injustices and a gesture of respect for our shared history. It would strengthen the Commonwealth bonds that your husband now leads." Ambassador Fatima Khan from Pakistan offered a different viewpoint. "The diamond has deep connections to Lahore, where it was housed for generations before British rule. Our people would see its return as healing a historical wound." Dr. Ahmad Nasiri, representing Afghan cultural interests, reminded Catherine that the diamond's earliest recorded history placed it in Afghan treasuries. "Your Majesty, the Kohinoor represents not just a gem, but the cultural heritage of multiple civilizations." As Catherine listened to these perspectives, she realized that the diamond's complex history made it impossible to determine a single, rightful owner. But perhaps that complexity itself offered a solution. That night she called her mentor, Lady Margaret Thornton, who had guided her through the early years of royal life. The elderly woman had served as lady-in-waiting to 3 queens and possessed an institutional memory that spanned decades. "My dear," Lady Margaret said after hearing Catherine's dilemma, "you're facing the challenge that every monarch faces, balancing tradition with progress. Your instincts are sound, but remember that how you handle this will define not just your reign but your husband's legacy. What would you do?"
Catherine asked. There was a long pause before Lady Margaret replied.
"I would ask myself, what decision would I want my great-granddaughter to be proud of when she reads about this moment in history books 50 years from now?" The answer came to Catherine with startling clarity. She wouldn't wear the Kohinoor at her coronation, but neither would she simply return it to any single nation. Instead, she would propose something unprecedented, that the diamond be placed in a rotating exhibition, spending time in museums across India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Britain, telling the complete story of its journey through history. The proposal would acknowledge the painful aspects of colonial history while creating a new model for how historical artifacts could serve education and reconciliation rather than simply national prestige. It was radical, unprecedented, and exactly the kind of moral leadership she wanted her reign to represent. When she presented the idea to William the next morning, his initial reaction was shock, followed by careful consideration and finally admiration. "It's brilliant," he said. "It addresses the injustice without creating new injustices, and it shows that our monarchy can lead on difficult moral questions." But Catherine knew that proposing this solution was only the beginning. The real challenge would be building consensus among governments, handling public reaction, and demonstrating that this decision represented strength, not weakness, in royal leadership. The announcement came on a crisp October morning, exactly 3 months after King Charles's death. Catherine stood beside William in the blue drawing room at Buckingham Palace, facing a carefully selected group of international journalists. The weight of the moment pressed down on her shoulders as she prepared to make a statement that would redefine royal tradition. Today, I want to address the question of my coronation crown and specifically the Kohinoor diamond, Catherine began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to announce. After extensive consultation with historians, cultural experts, and representatives from affected nations, King William and I have decided that the Kohinoor will not be worn at my coronation. The room erupted in a controlled frenzy of camera clicks and hurried note-taking. Catherine waited for quiet before continuing. Instead, we are proposing the establishment of the Commonwealth Heritage Foundation, which will oversee a rotating exhibition of the Kohinoor diamond across museums in India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the United Kingdom. This will allow millions of people to learn about its complete history and understand the complex legacy of our shared past. The questions that followed were intense and searching. A journalist from The Times asked about the constitutional implications. A reporter from the Indian Express wanted to know how the affected governments had responded. Catherine answered each query with careful diplomacy, but her underlying message was clear. This decision represented a new approach to royal leadership in the 21st century. The public reaction was immediate and polarized. Traditional monarchists expressed outrage at what they saw as capitulation to political correctness. Progressive voices praised the decision as long overdue moral leadership. Social media exploded with debates about colonialism, royal prerogative, and historical responsibility. But it was the responses from ordinary people that touched Catherine most deeply. Letters poured in from across the Commonwealth, many sharing family stories about the impact of colonial history. A particularly moving note came from an elderly Sikh gentleman in Punjab, whose great-grandfather had served in the court of Maharaja Duleep Singh. "Your Majesty," he wrote, "this decision honors not just our history but our shared future. My granddaughter in London will now be able to see the Kohinoor with pride rather than pain." The technical arrangements proved complex, but achievable. The diamond would spend 18 months in each location, housed in purpose-built security installations that met the highest international standards. Educational programs would accompany each exhibition, telling the story of the diamond's journey through different civilizations. As Catherine's coronation approached, attention turned to her new crown. Working with Garrard & Co., the crown jewelers, she had commissioned a design that honored tradition while reflecting contemporary values. The crown incorporated diamonds with verified ethical sourcing and included symbolic elements representing each part of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth realms. The design process became deeply personal for Catherine. She insisted on understanding the origin of every stone, ensuring that her crown would represent the values of transparency and ethical responsibility that she wanted to characterize her reign. 3 weeks before the coronation, Catherine visited the Tower of London for a private viewing of the crown jewels. Standing before the display case that had housed the Kohinoor, she felt a profound sense of completion. The empty setting where the diamond had rested for decades now told its own story about courage, change, and moral evolution. "Your Majesty," said the chief yeoman warder who was guiding her tour, "many of my colleagues were skeptical about your decision at first. But seeing the international response, the educational programs being developed, the way it's brought people together to discuss difficult history honestly, well, it's shown us what true leadership looks like." That evening, Catherine sat in her private study, reviewing her coronation speech one final time. The words she would speak would be heard by billions of people worldwide, but they would also become part of the historical record for future generations. She thought about George, Charlotte, and Louis, and the monarchy they would inherit. Her Kohinoor moment had become about much more than a single diamond. It had demonstrated that the monarchy could evolve, could acknowledge difficult truths, and could lead on moral questions rather than simply preserving traditions. The empty setting in the crown had become a symbol of fullness, full of possibility, honesty, and hope for a more just future. As she prepared for bed, Catherine realized that her journey from princess to queen was complete, not when she received her title, but when she found the courage to redefine what that title could mean in the modern world. Coronation morning dawned with brilliant sunshine streaming through the stained glass windows of Westminster Abbey. Catherine woke before her alarm, her mind crystal clear despite the magnitude of the day ahead. Today she would be crowned Queen Catherine, but more importantly, she would begin a reign defined by the courage to choose conscience over convention. The preparations unfolded with centuries-old precision. Catherine's gown, designed by Sarah Burton, combined traditional royal symbolism with contemporary elegance. Hand-embroidered with English roses, Scottish thistles, Welsh daffodils, and Irish shamrocks, it also featured subtle golden threads representing the Commonwealth nations, including lotus flowers for India and jasmine for Pakistan. As her ladies-in-waiting helped her dress, Catherine's mother arrived for a private moment. Carol Middleton, now the Queen Mother's mother, looked at her daughter with eyes full of pride and wonder. "Do you remember when you were little, how you used to dress up as a princess?" Carol said softly. "You always insisted that princesses had to be kind and fair to everyone. You never forgot that, did you?" Catherine felt tears threaten her carefully applied makeup. The little girl who believed in fairy tales grew up to understand that real queens have to create their own stories. The journey to Westminster Abbey took place in the Diamond Jubilee State Coach, its glass walls allowing the crowds to see their new queen clearly. Catherine waved to the hundreds of thousands of people lining the route, many holding signs expressing support for her Kohinoor decision. She spotted children from dozens of different cultural backgrounds, all sharing in this moment of national celebration. Inside the Abbey, 2,000 guests representing every aspect of British and Commonwealth society waited for the ceremony to begin. Catherine noticed the special section reserved for representatives from India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, a symbolic gesture that acknowledged their shared heritage and the new partnership created by her crown. Decision. Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. Michael Wright, conducted the service with solemn dignity, but Catherine detected a note of particular pride in his voice as he described the new reign's commitment to justice and reconciliation. When the moment came to place the crown on her head, Catherine felt the weight of her new responsibilities settling around her like a mantle. The crown, brilliant with ethically sourced diamonds and designed to honor both tradition and progress, caught the light streaming through the Abbey's ancient windows, where the Kohinoor would have sat. A specially commissioned sapphire now rested, a stone that represented wisdom, truth, and moral clarity. As the congregation sang "God Save the Queen" for the first time in her honor, Catherine's eyes found William's. Her husband, resplendent in his ceremonial uniform, smiled at her with a mixture of love and admiration that reminded her why they had been able to make such difficult decisions together. The moment that would be remembered in history came during her coronation address. Standing before the assembled dignitaries and speaking to a global television audience estimated at over 2 billion people, Catherine spoke words that redefined royal leadership. "Today marks not just my coronation, but the dawn of a monarchy that faces history honestly and builds the future courageously," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the ancient Abbey. "The crown I wear represents not just British heritage, but our commitment to justice, reconciliation, and the shared humanity that connects us all." She spoke about the Commonwealth Heritage Foundation and the Kohinoor's new role as a bridge between nations rather than a symbol of division. She outlined her vision of a monarchy that preserved valuable traditions while having the courage to change those that no longer served moral progress. After the ceremony, as Catherine and William appeared on the Buckingham Palace balcony before cheering crowds, she felt a profound sense of completion. The journey from Kate Middleton to Queen Catherine was finished, but the work of her reign was just beginning. That evening, in a quiet moment stolen between official celebrations, Catherine stood in her private sitting room, still wearing her coronation gown, but having removed the heavy crown. She held a letter that had arrived that morning from Dr. Priya Sharma, the historian who had first explained the Kohinoor's painful history. "Your Majesty," the letter read, "today you showed the world that true royal power lies not in what you possess, but in what you choose to do with what you have been given. The empty setting in your crown has become the fullest symbol of moral leadership I have witnessed in my lifetime." Looking out at the London skyline, Catherine understood that her Kohinoor moment had indeed signaled the dawn of a new reign. But more than that, it had demonstrated that even ancient institutions could evolve, that moral courage was still possible in positions of power, and that sometimes the greatest strength came from choosing to give something up rather than holding on to it. The reign of Queen Catherine had begun not with the acquisition of power, but with the wisdom to use that power in service of justice, reconciliation, and hope for a better future. Her crown, with its purposeful absence where the Kohinoor once sat, would remind future generations that true leadership sometimes requires the courage to break with the past in order to build a more ethical tomorrow.